Hello, everyone, and welcome to Draper. Today, we'll be discussing the mysterious case of Danny Casolaro. And if you like this channel, please subscribe and like the video. I know it seems like, a small detail liking the video, but it is important. So please take a second to just like the video and subscribe if you can, if you want to see more videos like this about crime or conspiracy. It really is important to me. So I want to thank you all for watching, and let's get straight into this video about Danny Casolaro and the octopus murder. Here's the thing about government cover-ups. Most of them stay buried, not because the truth isn't out there, but because the people who get closest to that truth have a way of disappearing before they can tell anyone what they found. Danny Casolaro was one of those people. He was a freelance investigative journalist, a writer, a man who followed a thread that started with a stolen software and ended with him bleeding out alone in a West Virginia hotel bathtub. This is that story. It all started right before Danny left for his final trip. He called his brother Tony and says to him emphatically, "If anything happens to me, it was not an accident." 3 days later, Danny was dead. The police ruled it a suicide. The body was embalmed before the family could authorize an autopsy, and the investigation was closed almost as fast as it was opened. But here's what the official story never explained. The 8 razor cuts, the missing documents, the witnesses that no one followed up on, and the string of deaths connected to the same case. This is the story of Danny Casolaro in a shadowy network called the Octopus, and the questions that have never been answered. Did Danny Casolaro take his own life, or did the Octopus take him out? To understand why Danny died, or why someone may have wanted him dead, you have to go back to a small tech company called Inslaw. Inslaw was founded by a man named Bill Hamilton. In the late 1970s, Bill developed a groundbreaking software called PROMIS, which stands for Prosecutor Management Information System. Think of it as a master database, a tool that allowed prosecutors, courts, law enforcement, and government offices to track criminal cases, share records, and manage investigations across many different agencies. This software was ahead of its time. It was so far ahead that the U.S. Department of Justice signed a 3-year contract to use it. But here's where the story turned. 2 years into that contract, the DOJ just stopped paying. They didn't cancel, they didn't renegotiate, they just stopped paying. And then quietly, behind the scenes, they began using a version of PROMIS that they had rebuilt themselves. Same software, different label, no royalties or compensation to the company Inslaw. The company was then driven into bankruptcy. Bill Hamilton, the owner of Inslaw, did not accept that quietly. He started asking questions, and that's when someone from the Justice Department called him in directly and said something very clear. If you don't stop investigating, it could be dangerous for you. We have ways of making you sell. That's not a negotiation, that's a threat. After the threat, Bill hired Elliot Richardson as his attorney, a former U.S. Attorney General and one of the most respected legal names in Washington. Richardson believed in the case and fought so hard on Inslaw's behalf. A federal bankruptcy judge named George Bain agreed. After reviewing the evidence, Judge Bain issued a stunning ruling. The Department of Justice had forced Inslaw out of business through trickery, fraud, and deceit. Then, something even more remarkable happened. Judge Bain was removed from the case, and the attorney who represented the Department of Justice during the trial was appointed the new judge. That new judge dismissed the case. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand exactly what that means. The government cheated a small company out of its software, had the judge who ruled against them removed, and replaced him with their own former attorney, and walked away clean. That is what investigators call a suppression pattern, a repeated sequence of institutional behavior designed not just to win, but to make sure no one can ever revisit the question. And once you learn to recognize it, you start seeing it everywhere in this story. Danny Casolaro was not by trade a hard-boiled investigative reporter. He was a writer, just curious and persistent, and deeply interested in an intersection of technology and power. He had been working with a computer industry newsletter called Computer Age, covering the business side of emerging tech world. When he discovered the Inslaw story, something clicked. He started calling Bill Hamilton every day, and the two men talked for hours. Bill was an unusual figure. He had a connection to the NSA, CIA, and had developed a theory about what was really happening. He believed that PROMIS hadn't just been stolen for domestic use. He believed that the government was doing something far darker with it, modifying the software, selling it to foreign governments, and using it to spy on those very same governments from the inside. Think about what that means. A country buys the software to manage their police and court records, but buried inside that software is invisible, undetectable backdoor, a hidden access point that lets the seller read everything the buyer stores inside of it. That's not a business deal. That's a weapon disguised as a product. Danny thought Bill might be right, and he started pulling on the thread. That thread led to a man named Earl Bryan. Earl Bryan had a long relationship with Ronald Reagan. When Reagan was the governor of California, Bryan served in his cabinet. When Reagan ran for president, Bryan was in the inner circle. And when Reagan won, Bryan was rewarded. Among Bryan's rewards was a stake in a technology company called Hadron, a firm that did computer contracts for the CIA and competed directly with Inslaw. Hadron, according to investigators, was one of the entities that received promise after it was taken from Bill Hamilton. But Earl Bryan's role goes deeper than that. And here's where the second name enters the story that's very important, a man by the name of Michael Riconosciuto. Michael was introduced to Earl Bryan through his father, who was reportedly a CIA asset. Michael, by all accounts, a legitimate prodigy in the computer engineering area, had a complicated path. As a young man, he had been convicted of manufacturing LSD and PCP in an underground laboratory and served 2 years in federal prison. The importance of that is that it shows that Michael had a very strange past and potentially some very deep ties to the CIA. Here's where Michael claims that he and Earl Bryan worked together to modify the PROMIS software, to rebuild it, to enhance it, and install a backdoor that Bill Hamilton had long suspected. And then Michael made an explosive claim, so crazy that even now, decades later, it has not been definitively proven or disproven. He said that him and Earl Bryan traveled to Iran in 1980 during the final weeks of the Carter administration and participated in what became known as the October Surprise. Here's the background. In 1979, Iranian Revolution forces seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 American hostages. President Jimmy Carter spent months trying to negotiate their release. The hostage crisis defined his presidency and crippled his re-election campaign. Ronald Reagan was running against him. Michael Riconosciuto claimed that Reagan's team, through intermediators, including Bryan, secretly paid $40 million to Iranian officials to delay the hostages' release until after the election. The goal was to make Carter look weak and ensure Reagan's victory. The hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, the exact day Ronald Reagan was sworn into office. Is this a coincidence? Possibly, but Michael claimed it was a transaction, and he claimed that as a reward for his role, Earl Bryan was handed the PROMIS source code to modify and sell internationally. I want to be honest with you here. Michael Riconosciuto is a complicated witness, man. He's a brilliant, incredible in some areas and outrageous in others. And Danny Casolaro struggled with the same question. How much of this is real and how much of this is just a legend? But Danny kept investigating because even if only part of it was true, it was one of the most important stories in American history. At some point, Michael told Danny that Inslaw case was just a single arm of something much larger. He told Danny about the Cabazon Indian Reservation in Southern California. The Cabazon Reservation was on paper a sovereign territory, exempt from California state laws. According to multiple sources, someone had figured out exactly what that meant. You could run operations on that land that would be untouchable by state authorities. A man who ran this operation was a man by the name of Dr. John Philip Nichols. Mr. Nichols was a man who traveled the world and believed by many investigators to be connected to the CIA or a similar intelligence structure. Mr. Nichols had come to the tribe with promises: a casino, apartment buildings, financial development, and a better future. What he delivered instead was an organized crime infrastructure, weapons development, gambling operations, and biological research that some sources describe in deeply troubling terms. And guess what? No money for the tribal members themselves. When the tribe began to suspect that Mr. Nichols was stealing from them, a man named Fred Alvarez started asking questions. Fred discovered a company called Whack and Hunt operating on the reservation, a private security firm whose leadership included veterans of the NSA, FBI, Secret Service, and the CIA. The projects they were running, according to Fred's research, included the development of biological weapons. Fred gathered plenty of evidence and he planned to meet with an attorney. He never made it to that meeting though. Fred Alvarez and his two friends were found dead in his backyard, each killed by a single gunshot wound to the head. To me, this means that the murderer must have known the victim pretty intimately to get that close to be able to kill 3 people with one gunshot wound to the head. Triple murder in this case was never truly investigated. Now back to Michael Riconosciuto. When Michael decided to support Bill Hamilton's legal case, he submitted a sworn affidavit describing his role in modifying the PROMIS software, what he knew about how the software had been stolen and sold. The response was immediate. Federal authorities reached out to Michael and said back off. Michael didn't, of course. 8 days after Michael's affidavit was filed, in March of 1991, he was arrested by federal DEA agents, not local police, not state authorities, but federal agents, on drug manufacturing charges. He was sentenced to 26 years in federal prison. 26 years for drug charges, issued 8 days after he became a problem for the most powerful people in this country. From prison, Michael reached out to Danny. He told him he had a recorded phone call, a tape of a federal official threatening him, evidence that could blow this whole case wide open. Danny went looking for the tape, but of course he never found it. I want to say that again. He never found it. Not because it didn't exist, but because at every turn in this investigation, the evidence that would have tied everything together had a way of disappearing, just before Danny could reach it. This is what made the octopus so hard to crack. It didn't fight you directly. It made the floor disappear every time you thought you were standing on solid ground. As Danny continued his investigation, the picture kept getting larger. He found evidence that suggested the proceeds from the Cabazon operations were being funneled into covert government projects, specifically programs that Congress had refused to fund. Programs like Iran-Contra, arms deals, off-the-books intelligence networks. He also found connections to BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, which was later exposed as one of the largest financial crime operations in history. A global bank used by intelligence agencies, drug cartels, arms dealers, and heads of state to move money outside of regulatory oversight. And then the deaths started to cluster. January 13, 1982. Paul Maraska, a friend of Michael Riconosciuto, was found dead in his apartment. He had been bound in a way that when his muscles gave out, caused him to strangle himself. The kind of death that requires specific knowledge to stage. A man named Philip Arthur Thompson, believed to be an FBI informant with ties to Michael's father and Robert Booth Nichols, were suspected of involvement. Different Nichols than Dr. John Nichols, who ran the reservation, but equally a bad and very dangerous man. What made investigators especially suspicious was that Michael Riconosciuto was the one who found Maraska's body. And then instead of calling local police, Michael drove 500 miles to the Cabazon reservation. The message, if there was a message, was not subtle. This is what happens when you talk to the wrong people. Danny Casolaro was the wrong people. By 1991, Danny's investigation had a name, The Octopus. He was writing a book, and he was getting very close. Close enough that his phone had started ringing with threats, anonymous voices telling him to stop, telling him what would happen if he didn't stop. Danny believed he had identified 8 key figures at the center of the network, people connected to the Iran-Contra, BCCI, PROMIS, and the Cabazon operation. One of those names, according to people Danny spoke with in his final weeks, was George H.W. Bush, then the sitting president of the United States. Then Robert Booth Nichols began speaking with Danny regularly, and at Danny's regular bar in Virginia, a stranger appeared. His name was Joseph Collier. He said he was a West Point graduate and he had just returned from Desert Storm. He said he knew some of the people Danny was investigating and that he could arrange for meetings and that would help Danny finish his book. Think about that for a second. A man Danny had never met at Danny's regular bar at the exact moment Danny's investigation was reaching the most sensitive point. A man with the right credentials, the right connections, and the right offer. That is either the most extraordinary coincidence or it is exactly what it looks like. But we will get to that in 1 second. Here we are, August 8th, 1991. Danny Casolaro checks into the Sheraton Hotel in Martinsburg, West Virginia. He told his brother Tony before he left that he was close, that he was about to bring back the head of the octopus. And remember what he said to his brother at the beginning. If anything happens to me, it was not an accident. August 9th is blank. No confirmed sightings of Danny. No verified contacts. A full day that no one has ever been able to account for. Then on August 10th, 1991, Danny Casolaro was found dead in his bathtub. The official cause of death was a self-inflicted wound to his wrist. The scene was blood throughout the entire bathroom, a bag over his head. His notes and research files, which had been brought with him to other meetings, were now gone. This all seems very suspicious. Don Shirley, a veteran medic who responded to the scene, said the case was unlike anything he'd ever seen in his career. Danny had 8 cuts on his left wrist and 4 on his right, which severed his tendons, Shirley noted. And he asked a question that official investigation had never really answered. With a severed tendon, how do you make cuts so deep on the opposite wrist? It seems very unlikely. Shirley's professional assessment was that it was a homicide. The West Virginia police had ruled it a self-inflicted wound, and then before Danny's family had authorized anything, before an independent autopsy could be done, the body was embalmed. Tony Casolaro, Danny's brother, was at a doctor's appointment when police reached him. By the time he asked about an autopsy, it was already too late. A thorough forensic examination was no longer possible. No one could establish who authorized the embalming. The family had not done it. The investigation never determined who had. There's one more detail that I think is important. Mary Liner, a woman staying in the room next to Danny's at the Sheraton, told police that she had seen a dark-haired man entering Danny's room without Danny present. Police asked her to write a statement describing exactly what she saw. She did, and then guess what? They never followed up. Here's the thing about government conspiracies. A lot of these deaths are not isolated incidents. There are more deaths that follow either before the main incident or after the main incident. Here are some of the deaths that followed after Danny Casolaro's death. A man by the name of Keith Allen Standoff, suspected of helping Danny in his research, was found dead in his car at Washington Dulles International Airport on September 8, 1991, with blunt force trauma to his head. Barry Kumnick, a computer engineer who had developed artificial intelligence to enhance the promised software, also disappeared. No body, no evidence, no explanation. Dennis Eisman, an attorney with information about the install case, was found shot dead in April 1991. And then there's one case so extreme it demands its own mention. Ann Spiro connected the install grand jury. His wife and 3 children were found dead inside their home. He was found days later in a car parked in the desert. These deaths don't prove anything individually, but as a pattern surrounding the same investigation in the same compressed period of time, they form what is called an extinction cluster, a concentration of deaths around a single inquiry that goes far beyond statistical probability. Here I'm going to give you some potential possibilities of what could have happened. Danny took his own life. It is a possibility. He had been living inside one of the darkest stories in American history for years. His sources were sometimes unreliable, his finances were strained, the book wasn't being finished, and he was receiving death threats. The evidence just kept slipping through his hands. If you spend enough time on a story like this, it can consume you. The rabbit hole becomes the only reality. But here is what doesn't fit: the forensic evidence. He had 8 cuts on his wrist, 4 on his other wrist, and a veteran medic who called it a homicide. The body was embalmed before the family could authorize an independent examination, and the research files that he was working on, they just vanished from the scene. Theory number 2 is that someone inside the octopus killed him. The most likely candidate based upon the information available is Joseph Collier, the man who appeared at Danny's regular bar at the most sensitive moment in the investigation. He offered introductions and then positioned himself as Danny's guide into the final leg of the story. We don't know who sent him, if anyone even did, but it definitely fits a pattern. And based upon the woman's testimony who saw a dark-haired man entering Danny's room without him, and then the police never identified that man, they never really even tried, I believe she saw Joseph Collier, a man who had worked for the CIA and then lied about his whereabouts on the day of Danny's death, could be involved. And this is just alleged. As per the usual in cases like this, the West Virginia police closed the case and then it was never reopened. So here's what I want to leave you with. Danny Casolaro was not a conspiracy theorist. He was an investigative journalist following documented fact: a stolen software program, a corrupt federal proceeding, a series of murders on a sovereign reservation, a possible secret deal with a foreign government, a bank that laundered money for intelligence agencies worldwide. And these are not theories. Most of them are now a matter of historical record. BCCI was real. The Iran-Contra scandal was real. The install theft was real enough that a federal judge called it a fraud before that judge was removed from the case. So here's the thing before we close out. Danny was either killed or he wasn't, and we may never know that for certain. But here's what we do know. The people who might have been able to answer that question made sure that the answer would never be found. They embalmed the body, they closed the investigation, they ignored that witness, and then they let the files disappear. And somewhere, the men who were at the center of the octopus, the ones that Danny was really close to closing in on, watched all of this happen and were probably happy about stopping it. They are the ones in the position of power. And being in that position of power gives them the upper hand to stop anyone that gets in their way. I would just like to say to the families of the victims in this story that you are not forgotten, and we pray for those who passed away at the hand of something evil. If this story made you feel like the ground beneath your feet shifted a little bit, good. It definitely should. Because the question Danny Casolaro was asking isn't just about 1991. It's about what happens when institutions designed to protect us decide that protecting themselves matters far more. This definitely should sound familiar with what's going on in the world today. This world is a scary place. The people, the networks, the money. The question is who gives the orders and who carries them out. And I'll try to dig into that with every video that I do here. But until then, these videos are not easy. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you like videos like this. And I'll do my best to give you guys the best video that I possibly can, week in and week out. So thank you so much for watching this channel. I appreciate it. It is not an easy thing to do, making these videos, especially being relatively new at it. But again, thank you so much, and God bless.